Welcome to the Pelicanman channel, and this is the Ford Falcon. Now, the Ford Falcon was an Australian built car from the Australian market and originally designed for the American market. The Ford Falcon had 7 generations and become an instant Australian classic when it hit the Australian market. It was originally designed for the American market and also sold 3 generations of their own in the American market. Now, the first Ford Falcon started production in 1960. It was known as the XK Falcon and rolled out to stores in September of that year. It had a 2-speed Ford-O-Matic or a 3-speed manual as your options, with an inline-6 2.4 litre that had a 90 horsepower and could produce at 4,200 RPM. It could hold 6 people in the car and sold 68,465 units, ending in August 1962, where the second Falcon rolled out on the production line was the much beloved XL Falcon, selling 75,705 units between 1962 and 1964, and the same Thrift Power 6 producing 90 horsepower, but with the optional choice of a larger 170 cubic inch Ford 6 engine that produced 101 horsepower if you're feeling to go fast. Now, the next Ford Falcon to enter the production line in 1964 was the Falcon XM, failing to join the upward trend of sales, actually seeing less sales than the original XK Falcons. 47,132 units were sold and produced. They were introduced in 1964 and only lasted a year, making this car exemptionally rare today. Though this car was an Australian design and built upon the complaints of the previous generation, still sales did not meet what Ford wished and almost marked the end of the Falcon. The XP Falcon was the make or break of the Falcon. Introduced in 1965, the XP Falcon succeeded due to one promotion stunt, the Falcon Mobile Durability Run, where they ran a fleet of XPs on the Yanks testing grounds for 110,000 kilometers or 70,000 miles at 110 kilometers an hour or 70 miles an hour. This stunt led to the grounds for the XP winning the Wheels of the Year award, with 70,998 units being sold, with anywhere from 90 horsepower to 121 horsepower, depending on what size of engine you got. Though the XP Falcon marked the end of the first generation of the Ford Falcon. The second generation of Ford Falcon started off with the XR, which was introduced in 1966, based on the US counterpart 3rd Gen Falcon. It was the first Falcon to ever come out with a V8 option with the 4-speed automatic transmission in Australia. It also introduced the Falcon GT in 1967, having the Windsor V8 engine sourced from the Mustang, producing 200 horsepower, with the GT variant producing 225 horsepower. Over the production run, the XR8 sold 88,786 units, becoming the most successful Falcon. The next model in line was the Ford Falcon XT, introduced in 1968, got a facelift and a few upgrades. It had 3 engine variants, a 3.1 inline 6, a 3.6 inline 6, and a 4.9 litre V8. That was ever so slightly more powerful than its predecessor, producing 210 horsepower, with the GT variant producing 240 horsepower. The XT only sold 74,000 units, 74,392 units over its long life span. It's year-long lifespan. Once again, not following upwards trends. The XW Falcon was introduced in 1969, with it being the first Ford Falcon to offer an air conditioning option from factory. The Windsor 351 V8 came stock in the GT variant, producing 291 horsepower. The XW was the only in production for a year, but produced in an astonishing 93,129 units within the year of its production, being incredibly successful, even introducing the GTHO and GS cars, GTHO Racing Pacific build cars, and the GS Grand Sport, being the car your dad bought to feel fast without being fast. But the XW was short-lived, like many Falcons beforehand. The next production vehicle was the XY Falcon, being produced between 1970 and 1972, being the first Falcon to hit a 6-figure sales mark, selling 100,474 units, with the GT versions and GTHO Phase 3 versions becoming collector's items, all sedans with the option as of a 351 Cleveland V8 engine that produced an estimate 385 brake horsepower, though official sales figures were much lower. The GTHO Phase 3 was the fastest four-door production vehicle in the world at the time, with Alan Moffat using this vehicle to win Australian Touring Championship in 1973 and the Hardy Ferrado 500 in 1971. The XY would mark the end of the second generation for Ford Falcon. In 1971, Ford brought out what was to become the most expensive Ford Falcon in history, marking the start of the third generation of the Ford Falcons. The XA rolled out. With the end of the US Falcons being produced, the Australian design team had much more control what they designed, but still very similar design to the Mustangs of the time. Ford has planned a Phase 4 GTHO and built 4 of them, the last to be sold for $2 million at auction, and this is now owned by private collector Paul Carthew, owns his beast. With only 3 still alive, between 1971 and 1973, these cars sold 129,411 units. The next model was introduced in 1973, the XB. This would become the best-selling Ford Falcon until the introduction of the XF 8 years later, selling 211,981 units. The GT variants having 300 brake horsepower. The car would star alongside the XA in Mad Max 1 and 2, it making it world-renowned. The car stopped production in 1976. With it brought the end of the GT variants. The last model of this generation was the XE, being produced from between 1976 and 1979. 171,080 units had been produced between these years. 114 horsepower and 123 horsepower was the average, with this model bringing the end of the GS variants for now. It brought the introduction of the inline-6 X-Flow, used until the XF series, also brought alongside the touring suspension to give better glide on the road. The XC was also brought along the legendary XC Falcon Cobra Coupe, using the last 400 hardtop GS body shells as its base. All cars were individually numbered, where cars 02 and 199 and 351 had a 5.8 litre V8 engine, whilst the rest had a 4.9 litre V8 engine. The fourth generation brought the Ford Falcon XD, came in 1979, a complete makeover, now resembling the Ford Granada in Europe. Once again, this car fell with the burden of making or breaking the production of future Ford Falcon once again, due to the pending oil crisis, but the sales figures once again kept the Falcon on store fronts from 1979 to 1982, from 200,849 units being sold. This was a remarkable achievement for Ford Falcon, especially after the intense makeover. The XE was the next Ford Falcon, which started production in 1981, selling a total of 191,000 units. 191,174 units, the last V8 Ford being produced until 1991, when factories opened back up. That Falcon was the Ford XE Fairmont Gear ESP sedan, VIN code #JG32AR33633K in November of 1982. V8 was replaced with the marginally less powerful 4.1 litre FE inline-6, going from 200 horsepower to 149 horsepower, with the base model having the new alloy head 2 inline-6 instead of the X-Flow. The next car to run out on the production lines was the XF, one of the best-selling Ford Falcons of all time. The XF being introduced in 1984 and sedan models being ceased by 1988, and van variants being produced all the way until 1993. Power and steering all-around brake disc becoming standard by 1986, with 178,028 units being sold within the first series. First series, which was between 1984 and 1986, and 146,701 units being produced between 1986 and 1987. Though this was a great car, this car had no V8 variant and showed that Ford Falcon Ford could make an amazing car without needing the V8. There were two more variants of the fourth generation, the XG and the XH Utes. The XG sold 24,592 units between 1992 and 1996, and the XH sold 28,357 units between 1996 and 1999, with the last generation being sold alongside both the fifth and the start of the sixth generation of the Ford Falcons. This generation would also be known as the Ford Longreach. The fifth generation of Falcon started off with the EA Falcon, which absolutely dominated the Australian market. Introduced in 1988, the EA had three choices of engines, all straight sixes: a 3.2 litre, a 3.9 litre, and a 3.9 litre CFI, with the choice of a 5-speed manual and a 3-speed automatic. This car was popular with taxi drivers and more popular with the general public as a family car because it was larger than the competing V8 Holden Commodore. The EA would have a second generation and would bring a 4-speed automatic into that generation. Now, with 209,000 units, 209,936 units being sold by the ending of production in 1991. Next car in the lineup was the less popular EB Falcon, being produced between 1991 and 1993. 121,211 units were built and sold. Though it was almost identical to the EA Falcon, it did bring back the V8 option, though only in sedans, the first Falcon to do so since 1982. EB Series 2, though, upgraded all the problems that plagued the first two cars, though it still had bad sales figures. The ED Falcon rolled out to the stores in 1993, introducing the XR6 and the XR8 variants. Following the downward trend of sales, only selling 72,571 units. The base model produced 198 horsepower with the SOC 4-litre straight 6, whilst the XR6 performance upgraded engine for 216 horsepower and the 5-litre FE-V8 produced a whopping 221, whilst at the same time you could get an SSVP, that was a V6 Commodore that produced 241 horsepower. Yeah, Falcon was the first Australian car to have a standard airbags to be in each model, brought out to the showroom in August of 1994. The car had a major face-up lift, and the car base model produced 211 horsepower with its upgraded straight 6. The bench seat came optional in the car, though the car had some unsettling driving capabilities, such as roll oversteer. The F only sold 185,000 units, far more than its predecessor. The L was the final car in the fifth generation, producing 140,795 units. The power remained at 211 horsepower with a 4-speed automatic column shift. The engine saw minor upgrades, such as a distributor being refitted and the coil pack removed. Tinted screens that gave the equivalent of SPF 15 plus sunscreen. The entire range, besides the GLI, was given braking, ABS braking, and a new upgraded suspension kit for the entire car that made the experience feel special and unique to you. This car became popular through the general populace that could afford one. The sixth generation started with the AU Falcon, Australia's most infamous car, powered by the Intake 6 the Barra engine. These cars were unstoppable, though they wouldn't reach peak popularity until the start of the 2020s. For a time, you could get these cars for $500 or a slab of piss and a job, but until recently, these cars weren't seen for the complete use until recently. With 3 generations, this car was made from 1998 to 2002 with 322,838 units, still producing 211 horsepower, and is seen as the ugly duckling, being outsold to both the VT and its successor, the VX Commodore. In short, it was a car made too early for people to realise its strength. With the next car in the line being the BA Falcon, being prettier and nicer to look at, debuting in September of 2002. This car held legendary Barra engine in it. With independent rear suspension, this model produced 281,197 units, as well as 2 new optional V8 engines. The BA Falcon produced anywhere from 209 horsepower for the detuned LPG straight 6s to 350 horsepower V6 Boss 260. The car was a statement. It was Australia's best performance vehicle and still claimed to be. But in 2005, the car come to an end, leading way to the BF Falcon and the last of its generation. The last car, the sixth of the sixth generation, would be the BF Falcon, built to be better. The powertrain, instead of the visually increase, the stock BF would produce 250 horsepower, and the fuel economy improvements, meeting Euro 3 emission standards, was superb thanks to the 530W oil that it used. Had a 6-speed automatic and an automatic electronic stability control available on certain trims. The BF Falcon sold 136,473 units, far less than its competitor the Holden Commodore VZ and VE of the time. The BF Falcon would be the last of its generation, finishing production in 2010, but it wouldn't mark the end of Ford Falcon just yet. In 2008, the 7th series, the 7th generation, would roll out the FG series. Now, there was a complete makeover, being boxier than the previous generations, with stock engine producing 261 horsepower, and due to emission regulation, the V8 was discontinued in 2010, with all V8 engines now being imported from the US. Now, those being the Boss 315 and the Boss 35, because they will still use Boss parts, both having over 400 horsepower. The Boss 35 having up to 450 horsepower. This generation saw GS making a comeback on the FPV range, Ford Pursuit vehicles, something that hadn't been since the XC over 30 years ago, with the Mark IIs getting further upgrades on the exterior and interior levels, including Bluetooth on all models except the entry, and 6-speed automatically becoming the standard instead of the 4 and the 5-speed automatics previous generations. The first ever 4-cylinder Ford Falcon was announced in 2009 and hit the showrooms of 2012, and by 2014, 191,314 units were sold of the Ford Falcon FG range Mark 1 and 2. The final Ford Falcon to hit the showrooms with the reintroduction of the XR6 since 2010. The FGX was to save the Ford Falcon from dying this time, and it failed, unlike all its predecessors. Unlike every car before it, it had the burden fell upon. The FGX finished production in November 2016, with only 11,570 units being sold, the least amount of units per car that had sold in any vehicle. Many had the FPV drivetrains and the Kodi V8, with straight 6 Barras producing 240 horsepower and the V8 Coyotes producing 436 horsepower. The death of the Falcon left a legacy of raw power, only challenged by those who dare step near. The Battle of Commodore and Falcon lost. If you sticked around to the end of the video, it would be appreciated if you would subscribe, like, and share this video. The amount of research that went into this is crazy. If you'd like to know more about a particular model or generation, leave me a comment below. I'm happy to do some more research, happy to turn it into another cartoon, happy to give you more photos, and have a good one. See you lads.